And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. George Bremer and Ryan Hickey here with you on a Tuesday. George, there's been a lot of craziness the last week with the scouting combine in town. Whole lot of news to get to. This really Tuesday episode is going to be a lot about just kind of trying to digest and really kind of talk about what we took away. But let me ask you this. After a very busy week of being in Indy, being at the stadium, the convention center, talking to teams, hearing teams and players talk, seeing players work out, are you recovered? I mean, this is almost like your own little mini combine yourself with all the running around and all the long hours you put in the last week.
I don't know if I'm recovered yet. I'm definitely feeling the combine. There's no question. But I got that little combine ick. You get that every year. So shaking that off. Otherwise ready to roll. But yeah, it was a huge week. And especially with the Colts right in the center of everything. I think that's what's so exciting. There's so many storylines out there, and it feels like every one of them, the Colts are front and center.
It's funny, George. We were just joking before on if you listened at all during the season, you know very well our predictions for the year were terrible. I think we got like 2 game picks right. Anytime we picked the Colts to win, they lost. Anytime we picked them to lose, they won. It was a very rough year for picks. This is, though, the one pick we nailed. And that was the fact that this offseason is going to be busy as hell. It's going to be chaotic as hell. And so far, that is living up to fruition without a doubt. Because like I said, we have so many storylines to kind of get into here, kind of unpacking the biggest takeaways from the scouting combine. So many Colts-related news items here, including updates on the number 1 overall pick and what the Bears are looking for. If Anthony Richardson, who was just blown up predictably at the scouting combine, if his rising stock, how that impacts the Colts, could be positive, could be negative as well. So we have a lot to kind of dive into here, George. Let me just start with this. It's been a very busy week. Like you said, we've heard a lot of players and coaches talk. We've heard a lot of GMs talk. You've seen players work out. What's, after the last week of the scouting combine, what's your biggest overall takeaway from this last week of what we'll say chaos?
Yeah. One, I think there is going to be a really good market up at the top of the draft. It sounds that way, at least. I mean, the Bears are pretty confident that they've got at least 2 suitors, if not more. I think Arizona has been trying to say that they're going to try to get involved in this at 3. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement up there. We'll see how that plays out. But the other thing that I think after, coming out of the combine, I think the 2 quarterbacks most likely to be traded up for are Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson. It'll be interesting to see how that goes, because they're completely opposite. I mean, I think that's what's so fun about these two. Like, you've got Bryce, who's undersized, but the tape is incredible, tons of experience, doesn't do very much on the field that you can pick apart. It's just, the perfect player on the field, except he's too small. And then you've got Anthony Richardson, whose tape is terrible, but is a giant and has, all the potential in the world. And no experience. You could not find 2 more completely opposite quarterback prospects, and they're probably the 2 that the teams are most likely to try to move up for. So I think that's going to be really fun to watch.
There's going to be a lot of debates, like I said, because they could not be more opposite, which means there's going to be a lot of different thoughts and a lot of strong opinions on why teams should draft Bryce Young or should not draft Bryce Young, or should be all in on Anthony Richardson, go to number 1 and get him. Like I said, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm not going to write up CJ Stroud just yet in terms of kind of being that guy where teams could make a play for either number 1 or number 2. Like I said, Richardson is the one who got all of the attention, it feels like, at the scouting combine. But you have, still, I thought for how much you want to take out of the throwing sessions to begin with, CJ Stroud looked pretty good in the little bit that he did throw as well. But like I said, with you look at Richardson's size, his arm strength, he was definitely the star of the show. He was definitely the quarterback outside of Bryce Young's weight. The only other topic and, overall thing talked about more was definitely Anthony Richardson and just the physical specimen that he is. My overall takeaway, or my biggest takeaway, is that when it comes to the Colts trading up to number 1, I think it's going to be a Shane Steichen call. Again, you usually think it's the GM who's the one who's making the move of whether to trade up or not. And Chris Ballard said when he spoke to the media on Wednesday that so far he has not seen anyone he deems as worthy of trading up for to the number 1 overall pick. But I do think, even in saying that, it's going to be a Shane Steichen call, because Shane Steichen is so early in this process. And we have seen Chris Ballard, a history of him doing what the coach wants and building a roster in the coach's eyes. So if you have Shane Steichen after the pro day, after the top 30 visits, let's say in a month from now, tell Chris Ballard, Chris, so-and-so is my guy. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis. whatever quarterback that Shane Steichen identifies to be the guy for the Colts, I think that's going to, Chris Ballard will hear that. And then even if maybe he's not all in or maybe just is waiting for that conviction from his head coach and the guy directly working with the quarterback he's going to draft to kind of get that sense, and then he's going to make the move to trade up. So I think the Colts absolutely will be aggressive in trading up, even though Chris Ballard tried his best kind of downplay that and basically tell you right now he's not seeing anyone he deems worthy of trading up for. I think at the end of the day, I hear Chris Ballard say that. I get where he's coming from, but I do think it's going to be a Shane Steichen call in terms of if he identifies the guy, it's going to be then on Chris Ballard to move up to make sure that the Colts get whatever guy Shane Steichen thinks, is the perfect fit for what he wants to run here in Indy. Let me ask you this, George, too. Speaking of quarterbacks and what you see and kind of, going on rankings and such, 3 of the 4 quarterbacks, right? Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, Will Levis threw on Saturday. You were there in person in the building watching them throw. Being in the building, kind of getting a sense and seeing them physically with their own 2 eyes, George, we both have been, guys who have said Bryce Young should be the top pick for the Colts. He should be number 1 on their board. Did you, after watching those 3 quarterbacks throw, did your preference change at all when you actually got to see them in person and how they look physically?
Yeah, first of all, I want to give a shout out to you. We were talking about how bad our predictions were. You nailed Bryce Young's weight on the
204.
204 pounds. So that might have been the biggest win of the combine, honestly. Bryce weighing in at that magic number of 200. I know the Bears had to be really happy about that because it certainly was important for them in keeping as many teams as possible interested in that number 1 overall pick. Beyond that, I thought the most impressive thing that happened in the combine was CJ Stroud's throwing session. You kind of knew going in, you'd heard he's a natural thrower, probably the best pure passer in this group. And he went out and had the workout he had to have, on the field. He didn't do any of the athletic testing, which I think was disappointing because I've heard he's a lot faster than people expect. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out when they get around to their pro days. I think that's something that could also kind of be a factor during this process. So it's kind of, I'm not really sure why he didn't run there, but we'll find out what happens, as they get to Columbus and go through that process. But, Daniel Jeremiah said afterwards, you couldn't have scripted a better day for him. I mean, it was just almost a perfect throwing session. And I think because of that, he's rising on my board. Bryce Young is the guy. We've talked about that for a long time. But I think coming out of the combine, between what he did on the field and the fire that he showed, we talked about that on the last episode, the fire that he showed in that interview process. I feel more comfortable with Stroud than I did maybe even on Friday before the quarterbacks talked. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And I think you start hearing his name attached a little bit more to Indianapolis. Right now it's lying season, like we talked about. It's hard to really dig through all of this, but you're starting to see his name pop up a little bit more. And I think a lot of that is, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but I think a lot of that is, the Colts and the Panthers are kind of emerging as the quote unquote favorites to trade up to number 1. And I think the thought process is if the Colts don't win that battle, then they stick at 4 and maybe Stroud is there, depending on what other teams do with Anthony Richardson and, what the team trading up wants to do. And that's what makes this such a confounding process. I mean, every scenario you play out is different based on who's picking number 1. And I think that makes it a lot of fun. But I've even seen a couple of mock drafts now where the Colts trade up to number 1 for Stroud. And last week I would have laughed at that. I mean, there's no way. And now, it's not what I would think would happen. It wouldn't be my most likely scenario if they trade up to 1, but it's in play. I think it's something that could happen.
I still think for the Colts, it should be, Bryce or bust, basically. If you're going to trade to number 1, I still think especially if they're going to trade up. Like, I think if you say they're going to sit there at number 4 and 1, maybe 2 teams jump them and you get CJ Stroud at 4, and that's kind of what they wanted all along. I think, to me, that is a more likely option right now than it would be them trading up to number 1 and then taking CJ Stroud over Bryce Young or even Anthony Richardson. Because now, again, you're starting to see Anthony Richardson, whether it's his Vegas odds, whether it's some mock drafts as well, starting to rocket up the board, which we'll talk about this in a little bit too. That maybe could be beneficial for the Colts as well. But it's one of those things where, look, Chris Ballard said it. I'm in his camp. Like, I'm not going to take much from what we saw on Saturday, especially CJ Stroud again. We knew he was very accurate. He called himself a ball placement specialist. I think he did nothing to question that on Saturday for sure. We saw Anthony Richardson line it up. I guess the only thing I will say takeaway wise from the combine throwing sessions is that I feel a little bit strong about Richardson over Levis. Like, I think I still have the order to me the same. Bryce Young 1, CJ Stroud 2, Richardson 3, Levis 4. The only thing that happened is I think there was a little bit greater separation between Richardson at 3 and Levis at 4. I really don't like Will Levis, to be honest. And again, Richardson, you can maybe talk me into a little bit more of just, hey, look, the guy's gonna be a project, but if this works out and we have a guy in Shane Steichen who has proven with maybe a guy of a similar stature in Jalen Hurts with similar questions about his throwing ability, he kind of, made him into what we just saw last year with a MVP runner-up and a Super Bowl participant in Jalen Hurts. Again, maybe convince me of that, but still, I'm not on board with Anthony Richardson right now. Although, again, the tools are impressive. The physicality is very impressive. There's just so much there that you just feel like I guess for me, it's just like you see how he plays at Florida. And that tells you one thing. It's like, oh boy, this is my guy. Shouldn't even be a first round pick. And then you see him at the combine. It's like, wow, he looks great. But why does he look great? Because you're really not asking him to do many football things. Like running a 40-yard dash is really not a football move for the most part when you're starting from a 3-point stance with no pads on. A broad jump or a vertical jump, I get it. Sure, it shows some displays of athleticism. But again, if you can't read a defense, if you're not accurate in your ball placement, if you don't know, a third down, where the blitz is coming from and how to process plays and how to go from reads 1 to 2 to 3, all that stuff doesn't matter. You could be, Adonis, if you will, from a body build perspective. If you can't do these simple quarterback things, I think now we're starting to see, by the way, too, the quarterback position is starting to become more even mental than physical. If you can just outsmart the defense, even if you lack some physical traits, like in Bryce Young's case, size, or in other quarterbacks' cases, arm strength, well, you could still have a very successful career. Drew Brees, Philip Rivers were not, let's say, studs physically by any stretch of the imagination, whether it's arm strength or size-wise. And one's going to the Hall of Fame, one might go to the Hall of Fame because their brains were always ahead of what the defense was doing. So that's where I feel like, I don't know, for me, when you look at the combine, it's all obviously about physical tools and how it looks. But if you don't have the mental aspect, if you don't have the processing speed, it's all almost irrelevant. And that's why, for me, again, Anthony Richardson created a little bit of separation with Levis, but he's still, to me at least, well down there at number 3, just because all the things he showed, we knew he had, but it's all the things that you can't really see until you get back on a football field that are still not answered, at least for me, until we see him back out there. And maybe it's just coaching, and maybe he's, Billy Napier and the offensive staff in Florida did not do a great job and really did not put him in a position to succeed this past year. Maybe it was Anthony Richardson just having so many drops, which he was not afraid to talk about, which I don't know if I really like that, to be honest, either. But whatever it is, it's just like I still very nervous about Richardson. I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid, at least, even though a lot of people out of the combine are definitely doing that for sure.
Yeah, I don't think he surprised anybody with what he did. I mean, we talked about that last
Right.
week, that he's going to come out and he's going to be an absolute freak, and it's going to, make him the buzz guy that he is right now. I get it, from a physical standpoint, being there in the stadium, he's ridiculous. There's no question about that. He's about twice the size, it feels like, than anybody else on the field. He's standing out there. I was talking to you a little bit about this before we started recording. He's standing out there about the 20-yard line, flat-footed, just flipping his wrist and throwing it to the other 30, 50 yards. And it's like me playing catch with my daughter in the front yard. I mean, no effort whatsoever, no strain. And so I know that there's going to be scouts and coaches and general managers who are looking at that and going, we'll teach him the rest. We can't teach Bryce Young to throw the ball 50 yards and just flip his wrist. We can't teach, CJ Stroud that, but we can teach Anthony Richardson to read a defense better or better footwork. You're going to get that. There's no question about it. But I think that's the among the many intriguing elements in this draft, that's right up there near the top. I mean, if you're the Colts, do you want to go up to 1, pay the price Chicago's asking, and get Bryce Young? Do you have that conviction? Do you want to stay at 4 and feel like there's a good chance you'll get either Richardson or Stroud there and not give up the extra draft picks? So I'm sure that's an argument that's going on in that building right now. And as you said, I think a lot of that will come down to Shane Steichen, because he hasn't really been in the process yet.
Right.
I mean, as we're recording right now, on Tuesday. They just announced coaching staff. So he's done with that part of it. And now he can dig into scouting these quarterbacks. You feel like on paper, Stroud and Young fit him better. He's a guy that wants, I know people look at Richardson and see Hurts. But if you look at what Steichen has said, and in particular, I wasn't there, but I know a lot of people who were. Peter King had that tweet up that he does every year at the combine. Steichen speaking there, a lot of people said he talked more about Phillip Rivers than he did anybody else that he coached. And when you look at what Phillip Rivers did well and what made him a potential Hall of Famer, it's things that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud do well. So you take that for what it's worth. There's no doubt that a Steichen Richardson pairing would be really interesting. But I'm not sure that'll be his preference. We'll see here in a couple months.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely get a good feel, especially as like I said, we'll see what the Colts want to do here for sure. But yeah, I think it makes sense. Again, it makes sense to me, and also too when you hear Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard, whether it was in the introductory press conference, whether it was just this past week talking with the media at the scouting combine, they both were kind of echoing the same traits they look for in a quarterback, and a lot of that was processing speed. A lot of it was mental. Like they didn't really, Chris Ballard almost kind of poo and wave off arm strength. Like, it's like arm strength, whatever. Like, it's almost like overrated. Like to me, at least one of the senses I got, especially from this past week when they both talked last Wednesday, was they really value from the neck up. And that's part of the reason why we talked to when we were previewing the scouting combine last week, was that the biggest and most important part of the scouting combine for the Colts is going to be those 15-minute interview periods you have with each of the quarterbacks. We're not going to see it. We're not going to hear about it. But how those quarterbacks do in their first impression, talking about the game, talking about how they, developed in their offense, talking about concepts and reading defenses, that is going to be the biggest part, I think, in the first evaluation period for the Colts in identifying their next guy, more than what we saw, for a quarterback running the 40 or how they threw a 60-yard deep ball to a receiver they never thrown to before. So that's why, like I said, I think it all really starts to, cement itself here as we go about, a little less than 2 months away from the draft. I think we can really start to draw a line between the two quarterbacks at the top where the Colts are prioritizing, and the two at the bottom. I think you hit it. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, I think, are now really starting to separate themselves from Anthony Richardson and Will Levis, to the point where I think it'll be a surprise if it is Richardson or Levis, where the Colts, whether it's at 4, at 3, at 1, I think now we're really starting to see, like you said, because of they value so much in the neck up, because you hear Shane Steichen kind of, talk about, his love of Phillip Rivers and how he played the game and kind of wanting his quarterback to mirror that, like I said, trends in the direction of Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. That, I think, is one of the things we can kind of take away a little bit from the Colts here as they go forward in terms of who they want, kind of more that mold of quarterback than kind of just the physical but raw talents of Levis and Richardson. Speaking of the first pick, George, let's get into that, because we also, speaking of Peter King, we learned some interesting details about what the Bears are asking for. Ryan Poles, GM of the Bears, was talking to Peter King at the combine last week, and he seemed, at least, or trying to portray, very confident about the haul the Bears can return. He told Peter King that if you include a pick swap, right, so it's 1 to 4, 1 to 2, whatever, when you just switch firsts, he thinks he can get a first-round pick this year, next year, and 2025. So 3 first-round picks, bare minimum. Before we talk about, let's just ask you this. Is that realistic? Because we talked about George last week. It's lying season, and you got to take everything you hear about who does this benefit. Obviously, we don't have to guess where the source is. It's Ryan Poles himself on the record telling you, I could get 3 first-round picks for trading for number 1. Do you believe Ryan Poles right now, at least, that the price he says he can get, he truly could get?
I don't know if I believe him right now. He's obviously motivated to say something like that, and to make other teams that are in the bidding feel that way. But it's not unrealistic. I mean, you go back and look at the RG3 deal in 2012, and there were 3 first rounders involved in that. So,
and that was from 6 to 2. Right.
Yeah, that was a go to 2. So, the thought of it being the price at 1, I think, is very realistic. And a lot of it comes down to how motivated these teams are. The part of the Peter King report that really stuck out to me, 2 of them, really. One is that in his eyes, Indianapolis and Carolina will be the 2 most motivated teams to move up. And he does believe that Chris Ballard will pay the price if, again, as we keep going back to, might as well just put that asterisk on everything we say, if they identify one guy is worth it. or more.
True. Yeah.
That's the underlying truth to all of this. I mean, that's just understood in this process. If they do, though, I things are different for Chris Ballard this year around. We've talked about that a couple times already on the show. His job's a little bit on the line here. It's a different situation than what he's had in previous seasons, coming off that 4-12 in 1 year. So I think you will see him be a little bit more aggressive, especially with this quarterback spot, because you need something next year. This isn't a 3-year process. Not that they need to make the playoffs or suddenly win 10 games, but you need forward momentum. You need obvious improvement. And the other part of it that I thought was interesting was that Peter King said the Bears have 6 to 8 blue players. So the same terminology that Chris Ballard uses for elite guys. And that makes you wonder, can you risk going to the Panthers? Because they're obviously picking 9th. If those 6 to 8, if they involve even one quarterback and it's 6, will they be there? That's 5 other guys at pick 8. I don't know, the way that shakes out. So that's really intriguing to me. I think it's clear Carolina's going to have to pay more than Indianapolis would to get up there, if in fact that is where the competition is. But it's a really interesting battle there. Because you've got not just the compensation, but the Bears' comfort level and how far they're willing to go down.
I think this is going to sound weird. I think both Ryan Poles is telling the truth and lying. Here's what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. I think he's telling the truth because you mentioned the Panthers, right? And Peter King called them with the Colts the most aggressive, or the 2 teams he expects to be the most aggressive. I would say right now, if you had to ask me, I would say the Panthers have already told the Bears they're comfortable giving up 3 first-round picks. I think they would, if you could say tomorrow, make the trade, I would say the Panthers absolutely would give 3 first-round picks to go from 9 to 1. So I think that offer is realistic right now. But here's why I think Ryan Poles is lying. I don't think he wants to go from 1 to 9. You just mentioned it. They have about 6 to 8 blue players. Albert Breer had a very similar report where he said that the Bears have basically 7 players they target as worthy of drafting first overall. So let's say that player, the range is from 6 to 8 players that they feel really comfortable and really want to draft one of those 6, 7, 8 players that they have identified. Like you said, you go to 9, well, all of a sudden there's no guarantee, number one, that you're going to get that player you want. And for the Bears, you need picks, yes, but you also need players. Like, it's not just enough to accumulate as many picks as you can. You also need to be getting high-level talent. And this Bears team desperately on offense and defense needs as much talent as possible. So you want to trade down, but also trade down and be in a spot where you can acquire premium talent. And that's why I think that he's saying that in part because he has an offer from the Panthers. I just don't think he wants to go from 1 to 9. I think he wants to go from 1 to 2 to 9, 1 to 4 to 9. I don't think right now the Colts and or the Texans are willing right now to give up 3 first-round picks. And again, we kind of talked this last week. I think the Bears, they are, to me, I would say their goal right now is to trade twice. I think that is what they're looking for, unless they somehow just get truly blown away by the Panthers or the Raiders where it's a deal you just cannot refuse. I think their goal is, let me trade down either from 1 to 2 with the Texans or 1 to 4 with the Colts first, and then try to capitalize on another desperate team, whether it's the Raiders at 7, the Falcons at 8, the Panthers at 9, maybe, another team that, we don't foresee right now that truly wants to get, a guy as he starts to slip. I think they're trying to trade twice. And that's where I think those 3 first-round picks come into play, where I think they're trying to get 3 first-round picks, but in the span of 2 trades and obviously more than that. So I think the 3 first-round picks are out there from the Panthers. I just don't think right now they're out there from the Colts or the Texans. And that's really what Ryan Poles, I think, wants. And that's why he's out there basically trying to almost bully or put the pressure on Chris Ballard and Nick Caserio to pay the price he wants, because he really does not want to go from 1 to 9. Let's though say,
wonder too, could the Colts or Texans get some players involved in there too? Like if Houston says, we'll do 2 first-round picks, we'll throw Brandon Cooks into the mix, give you a receiver, does that change the math? If the Colts say, we'll do 2 first-round picks and somebody like DeForest Buckner, who we know Matt Eberflus is, a big fan of, does that change the math? And that might be part of this too, not just trying to get that pick, but trying to get a player or multiple players from Houston or Indianapolis. That's, again, it's fascinating, this whole process.
Absolutely. And like I said, that's where the relationship between the Colts and the Bears really does kind of work, because again, you have Matt Eberflus, who's worked with so many defensive players on a team that is desperate for defensive talent. You help maybe a DeForest Buckner or a Kenny Moore inclusion in a trade proposal or package could, again, maybe take away 1 pick or maybe make that that Colts package more attractive than what the Texans are offering, what the Raiders are potentially offering, what the Panthers are maybe offering as well. So that goes back to, again, we highlighted and talked a lot about the Bears-Colts relationship and how that could really be, give the Colts an advantage in terms of trading for number one. And you hope that, I said, the players and the familiarity, especially with Matt Eberflus, of those defensive players can maybe help convince Ryan Poles to take one less second-round pick or one less third-round pick, take this player and kind of put that over the edge for the Colts. If Ryan Poles is telling the truth, and let's say he's not going to trade the first overall pick unless he gets 3 first-round picks back, and that's the same for the Colts, the Texans, the Panthers, he's basically saying, bare minimum, 3 first-round picks. That is the price. I'm not going below that. Do you think Chris Ballard would pay the price? Do you think Chris Ballard would say 3 first-round picks for number one? You got it.
I mean, he gave up a first-round pick for Carson Wentz, so I do think that it's possible. I mean, I would give up more for Bryce Young than I would give up for Carson Wentz. So, again, it comes down to this player evaluation, because I think a big part of this is, where are the quarterbacks at on their tiers? They may very well have the same ranking we do. I don't know that they do, but let's just assume for simplicity's sake that they do. Bryce Young's number 1, CJ Stroud's number 2, Anthony Richardson's number 3, Will Levis is number 4. How badly do you want to get that number 1 guy? What's the gap between them? That's the other part of it. It's not just, what order they're in. How far is that gap? Is Bryce Young the 5th player on the board and CJ Stroud's 12th or 15th, or is it 5 and 6, or 1 and 2, 3 and 4? I think that is critical here, because the price that he's willing to pay is going to be, I think, as much about that gap as it is about the evaluation on the individual player. If you feel like the gap's small enough, and again, Richardson fits into it, because if you're staying at 4, you can't guarantee Stroud either. So you'd have to say Stroud or Richardson is worth more, along with keeping all the picks that in future drafts and keeping all the picks in this draft, than going up to 1 to get Bryce Young. That, to me, is the real question here. We keep talking about evaluation process, and that individual evaluation process is really important. But I think in the end, it's that gap that's going to make the biggest difference. And that's where, again, the coaching staff and Shane Steichen in particular come into play, because they're the ones that are likely going to sit in there and say, we can win a lot more games with Bryce Young than we can with any of these other guys, or CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson or whoever it is that they determine. That, to me, is the real factor here that will determine whether they'll pay it or not. If they decide that gap's big enough, you swallow hard and you pay the price, because it's the most important position in professional sports.
And we talked about before, there's no price that's too high for a guy that you believe can be a true franchise quarterback, a guy that can lead your franchise to the next decade. Giving up 2 first-round picks in the future to get a guy that you think right now could be at the quarterback for at least the next 10 years, 12 years, and give you a real chance in a loaded AFC to compete for the AFC South on a routine basis and compete for a Super Bowl on a routine basis. Again, there's no price too high. The Chiefs, the Bills, they are not regretting their price to trade up to draft Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. It is well worth it. They have no problem, giving up what they gave up. So that's why, if you're Chris Ballard, I think he will pay the price. One, he's already talked about it before. Basically, you said, I'll do whatever it takes to get the guy. You said the key word is the C word, conviction. If there's conviction that this is the guy we need. He is clearly better than all the 3 other quarterbacks, and that this is far and away gives us the best chance to win for the next decade. I think he'll do it. Also, too, I think because of the pressure you mentioned on Chris Ballard, I think we're going to see Chris Ballard deviate from what he normally has done. Now, again, in one sense, he has been very conservative, right, in terms of loving trading back. Also, you mentioned the Carson Wentz trade, the DeForest Buckner trade as well. He's also not been shy about trading first-round picks for talent. So it's not like this has been a guy that's been only hoarding first-round picks, only looking to trade back anytime he has an opportunity to. He has been aggressive when he identifies that opportunity to be aggressive. And I just think with the pressure on him, I think right now, I think he will be aggressive, just because we've seen it in the past. And also, too, like I said, you kind of have to be this year, where it's kind of not this season specifically make or break, but this decision in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now is going to determine whether you are, one of the best GMs in the NFL, or whether you're on the street looking for another job. And we kind of talked about it before, but if you're Chris Ballard, where this is going to be the last quarterback you're going to, draft, maybe one of the last decisions or big decisions you're going to make, you want to go down swinging at least, right? You want to go down taking a chance on your guy. If you're going to get fired in 2 years or 3 years, at least have it be on the guy you love, whether it's CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, whoever. At least go down and swing with your guy. Don't stay there at 4. Don't move up to 3 or to 2 and get the guy that okay, we wish we had, number 1 on our board, but we couldn't trade up, and now we're going to be stuck with number 2. We like him, not as much as the first guy, but we're going to kind of ride here at number 2, or number 2 option, and then get fired because it doesn't work out. Like, at least if you're going to, this is, again, a make or break kind of draft. This is a big draft for Chris Ballard. At least if you're going to take a risk, at least take a risk and go down swinging with your guy you believe in and have kind of no regrets. And don't play the woulda, shoulda, coulda game. If only gave up an extra second round pick, I could have gotten my guy number 1, and who knows where we would be. I think that's part of the reason why I think 3 first round picks. It's a very high price. We've never seen Chris Ballard kind of be that aggressive in the draft. I think we'll see it if that's what it takes, and that's the conviction they have. I think he'll do whatever it takes to get the guy to go to number 1.
And the other part of this too is that guy that you have number 1 might be playing in the division if you don't give up the price. I mean, to me, this is the most fascinating draft, not just from a Colts standpoint, from the NFL standpoint in a long time, because normally we have coming out of combine, you have a decent idea. I mean, I remember a few years ago, we knew Arizona was going to take Kyler Murray and trade Josh Rosen. That was pretty well known. Even last year, the Trayvon Walker train started here. It wasn't it hadn't come in yet. It was, it didn't finish the journey, but there was already buzz that it could be Walker. Look out, he's in the mix. This year is really hard because nobody knows who the first quarterback taken is going to be, first of all, but secondly, nobody knows which team is going to be making that pick. So, it's just, to me, and it's fun for us because we get to sit here and speculate. It is the most intriguing, like top 5, top 10 in years.
Especially too, because it's not just what are the teams in the top 5 going to do. It's who's going to jump in and crash the party. And we've talked a lot about, what we've heard from the combine and what kind of, news and notes are coming out of this last week in Indy. Peter King, again, is another one who talked about, we mentioned before. He said the 2 teams he expects to be the most aggressive to trade up to number 1 are the Colts and the Panthers. You had Cameron Wolf of NFL Network. He was on Good Morning Football on Tuesday morning, and he covers the NFC South. And he was saying, from what he was hearing in Indy this past week, that he has gotten the sense that no team is going to be more aggressive in the draft in terms of trying to move up than the Carolina Panthers. So it's also, I'm sure, because David Tepper is an aggressive man. We know Frank Reich in 5 years has not had a quarterback of stability. So he's hungry to get a guy that will be there for more than 1 year. So it makes a lot of sense on the surface why the Panthers at number 9 would be aggressive to going up to number 1, number 2, number 4, number 5 to get a quarterback. Let me ask you this then, George, with the Panthers kind of out of this weekend, getting a lot of steam of a team to keep an eye on in terms of how aggressive they'll be in trading up. Number 1 pick is obviously for sale. Who is a bigger threat in your mind, you think, to jumping the Colts and getting a number 1 overall pick? Is it the Texans at 2, or is it the Panthers at number 9? Who's the bigger threat?
I think it's the Panthers, and I don't know if I would have said that coming into the week. For one thing, we kind of threw this possibility out on one of the pods last week. I'm not 100% sure that Houston isn't going to be looking into Jimmy Garoppolo, just in terms of trying to bring him in and let him tutor whoever they get. If they do that, maybe they'll look to trade up again at 12 and get like a Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson if they can. Carolina, I don't know they got a plan B. I don't know that there is, they talked about Derek Carr, but we've already seen that ship has sailed. He's in the division now playing for the Saints. And they didn't have a lot of cap space anyway, so I don't know how realistic that was. Maybe they jump in on a Lamar Jackson market if that comes to be. We should know that by the time people are listening to this podcast, because we'll know what tag was placed on him, but there is some talk Baltimore may make him available. And if that happens, maybe Carolina jumps. That seems like a Tepper move. Yeah. And I'm sure they can move money around to make that happen. But aside from something like that, which is a long shot, what other plan is there? I mean, are they going to get excited about, Jameis Winston? Are they going to get excited about Marcus Mariota? I mean, it's not a great free agency group out there, especially since the Packers apparently are not going to talk to NFC teams about Aaron Rodgers. And I think that leaves Carolina in a position you want to either get up to 1 and get your guy, or at least get to 3 where they could guarantee one of Stroud, Young, or Richardson.
I still think the Texans And you make great points. Again, that's the reason why the Panthers are going to be aggressive. Like you said, David Tepper's an aggressive man. Frank Reichardt's a quarterback. And like I said, the Derek Carr now going into your division and easily being the best quarterback in that crappy division, I think it's going to, like I said, spur them to kind of try to get their guy. I still think, though, it's a Texans just because, number one, Texans have to give up less than the Panthers do to trade up from 2 to 1. And also, kind of like we talked about before, I really don't think the Bears want to go from 1 to 9. I think they really want to go from 1 to 2 first or 1 to 4, and then maybe drop back again to number 9. I think they're going to try to do everything possible to avoid making that 8-team jump right away. Because also, too, if you're the Bears, that's it. Like, you're not trading again for number 9 because from what we've seen so far, I think it's pretty likely that at least 3 quarterbacks that teams want to trade up for and be aggressive on will probably go in the top 10. So if you're the Bears and you really want to trade back twice and kind of really get the most bang for your buck in terms of trading this number 1 overall pick, I think if you go right to the Panthers and you accept, let's say, their 3 first-round picks, I don't think you're getting much more than that. Now, it's still a good haul, don't get me wrong, but if you have it, visions of multiple seconds, multiple firsts, picks down the line here, I think the best way to do that, the only way to do that is go from either 1 to 2, 1 to 4, and then trade down maybe once, maybe twice after that. So that's why I still think it's a Texans, just because the price is going to be lower, obviously, than the Panthers. And I really think the Bears are motivated from everything we hear so far of trying to trade down twice. So I get that the Panthers are absolutely a team to watch. A team that scares me if you're the Colts and you want to stay at number 4 is the Cardinals at 3. That's a team that I could say I could see if the Panthers come with 3 first-round picks to go from 9 to 3. That could be an issue where the Colts could get jumped and have a threat if they do sit there at 4. But at least for number 1, I'll say right now, from what we've learned, from what we heard, especially from the combine, the Panthers are getting a lot of hype and praise. And like I said, now they're kind of like that team where everyone's talking about. I still don't think, at least for the Colts, directly, it's going to be their biggest competition for the number 1 overall pick is going to be the Texans. Now, you brought it up just before. This was a report from Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports earlier today on Tuesday. This is fascinating, and this could change the calculus for the Colts going forward and could really change even what you think about the draft. According to Jonathan Jones, and this is someone who is very well respected at CBS. This is not someone who is put stuff out there for clicks, right? And is a hot take artist or just kind of goes with a half rumor that's maybe not true and just kind of wants attention. This is a guy that is very vetted and has good sources. According to him, he says internally there's a push within the Texans organization to sign Jimmy Garoppolo for 2023, make him the starter, still draft a quarterback, whether it's at 2, whether it's at 1, whether it's at 12, wherever, still draft a quarterback in the first round, sign Jimmy G, play Jimmy G in 2023, and basically do what the 49ers did with Trey Lance and, have him sit behind Jimmy G, ironically the same quarterback, learn for a year, and then play in 2024. Now, it's interesting. Obviously, DeMeco Ryans coming over from, San Francisco to the Texans, knows Jimmy G very well. Their offense coordinator also came from San Francisco as well. So there's a lot of familiarity with Jimmy Garoppolo and the process of drafting a young quarterback and also having a veteran be there for leadership, mentorship, and to start the first year. If this is a move that the Texans make and they do sign Jimmy G, which quarterback do you think that in that case, George, are they likely to target? And does that change your thoughts of them being aggressive to trading up to number 1?
Yeah, I don't see them signing Jimmy and going to number 1. I think that would be a bit much. But I can see they got a lot of capital. I mean, like you're talking about, they got 2 and 12, but they've got more in future drafts too because of the Deshaun Watson deal.
2 first rounders next year too.
Mm-hmm. So they've got, there's a lot that they can do to move around this board. And what I thought would be interesting if you're the Texans is, and this is pure speculation, but just my thinking, you sign Jimmy G, you draft Will Anderson at number 2, and you get that bedrock pass rusher for your defensive-minded head coach, and then you use some of your other capital to move from 12 to wherever you need to get Anthony Richardson. That'd be a pretty good offseason for the Texans.
Or even, I wonder, do you think they would do this? Sign Jimmy G. Would they trade from 2 to 4? Would they trade with the Colts? Now, I don't know if the Colts would want to move up. I don't think
so.
No?
I don't think so, because you just don't want to help the Colts out. If the Colts want to give up the Bears price and get ahead of you, you can live with that. But I don't think you want to help the Colts out. You might go to 3, though, with the Cardinals and get, pick at 2 and then trade at 3 and still get a quarterback ahead of the Colts, assuming like Carolina moved up to 1. To me, the nightmare scenario for the Colts is if Carolina goes to 1 and then the Texans, or not if Carolina goes to one, the Houston goes to one, and then the Bears trade out of 2 to Carolina, because that's when
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're picking your third quarterback on the board.
And that's assuming, again, a team like the Seahawks or a team like the Raiders don't jump you at 3 and trade with the Cardinals. And again, we talk about desperation. Panthers are a team that's very desperate. The sense I got, at least from kind of seeing all reports, is I think the Raiders are all in on drafting a quarterback this year as well. I've not seen who they like, but again, if you are Josh McDaniels and you're looking at, like you said, it's Panthers, Texans 1 and 2, or Texans, Panthers 1 and 2, and you know the Colts at 4 are going to take a quarterback. If you're McDaniels, if you're the Seahawks, I'm sure you're hitting the panic button of, oh boy, we better get moving. It's now or never. We need someone. And like I said, they go up to number 3 with the Cardinals, where you're right. The Colts could be picking either the 3rd or 4th quarterback potentially on their board. And then that is by far, worst case scenario. I'm 100% with you there. When it comes to the Texans possibly signing Jimmy G, I think that does change. I'm with you 100%. I don't think they go then from 2 to 1. I think they sit there at number 2. And I think that changes who they draft. I don't think you're going to sign Bryce Young, or I should say draft Bryce Young, and then sit him behind Jimmy G for a year, because Bryce Young is not a guy that needs real development. He just, again, the biggest thing with him is size, but he knows the game very well. The speed, seemingly the mental aspect of the game from Bryce Young's play is at a high level. So it's not like he has to learn how to play in the NFL. I think if you are the Texans and you sign Jimmy G, I think you're staying at 2. Maybe you said you drafted Will Anderson, or maybe you sit there and take a quarterback. I think the guy to watch is Anthony Richardson then, because I think that's a kind of quarterback, or Will Levis, but that's the kind of quarterback you draft, similar to what the 49ers did with Trey Lance, where you go for the ceiling. You go for, if everything works out, this could be the best quarterback in the draft because he has all the tools. And if we give him a year behind Jimmy G, if we have him work in our offense, we think we can have basically the next Josh Allen 2.0, or maybe even better. That's, I think, where if you sign Jimmy G, that's, I think, where the calculus changes. I don't think you're signing Bryce, I keep saying signing. I don't think you're drafting Bryce Young and signing Jimmy G. I think if you sign Jimmy G, I think to me that's a telltale sign that either the Texans will trade down, and like I said, use that number 12 pick to maybe move up to get Richardson, or you sit there at 2, say, screw it, we'll just take Anthony Richardson, see where the draft plays out at number 12. Maybe there's a defensive player we like, we'll trade up from 12 to 6 or 12 to 7, whatever. But I think that's a situation where they would then, I would say, probably have Richardson number 1 on their board if they get a Jimmy G signing, which again changes the calculus for the Colts and Chris Ballard altogether. Maybe that helps lower the price if you're going from 4 to 1 with the Bears. Maybe that leaves you more inclined to sit there at number 4 or trade up to only number 3. I mean, really, this Jimmy G, I honestly, George, up until this weekend, I never even really thought to pay attention a lot to Jimmy G. I thought he was just going to go to the Raiders and go with familiarity. If he goes to the Texans, that changes a lot. I think that is a great sign here for the Colts.
Oh, absolutely. And he could still end up in the Raiders. A lot of the things that we just talked about with Houston makes sense there. I mean, obviously he's got, a lot of Patriots people in that front office and on that coaching staff that he could go and be with. And the Raiders could then take a similar stance to what we were just talking about with the Texans, where they could, go and look for more of a developmental guy like Richardson or Levis, and not worry so much about trying to get to the top of the draft. I also think, though, from a Houston standpoint, Jimmy G gives you a little bit of insurance. If Bryce Young is their guy, let's just say that Bryce Young is their guy, and that's also been rumored. The connection there between their head coach, being an Alabama guy, and having those those contacts down there, and really liking Bryce Young. When you sign Jimmy G, then if somebody jumps you, at least you've got Jimmy G and you can pivot to a Richardson. And if they don't, you've got 2 quarterbacks. You can live with that.
That's true. I guess you're right about that. And yeah, you can't really trust Jimmy G to be out there for 17 games. And the Texans, I guess they're going to try to win, but also they need so much help everywhere else that it's not like one of those things where they'll be a playoff contender next year for sure. But that would be really, I think, a really good, interesting piece here for the Colts. I guess the only area you can get concerned about and still have a reason to trade up to number 1, even if the Texans sign Jimmy G, is that I think your biggest fear is, okay, well, if the Panthers, like I said, go to 1, the Texans at number 2 may be inclined to trade with the Raiders or trade with the Seahawks and another team. And now all of a sudden, again, if you're the Colts, you're in a similar situation where even though the Texans are not drafting a quarterback, they accumulate more picks and go to 5 or go to 7. You're still then at best getting the 3rd best quarterback on your board. And that's what the Texans decide to do. And they, again, they get Richardson, but they think, oh, we can wait or even get Will Levis. but we can wait till pick 7 or 8 and do so and get more capital and get our quarterback of the now and Jimmy G, the quarterback of the future and Levis or Richardson, and also kind of screw the Colts in a way because we're going to help prevent them from getting Bryce Young if he's still on the board, or even CJ Stroud if that's the number 2 guy, and trade with a team, like I said, the Raiders or the Panthers or whoever else wants to jump up there and get a quarterback. That could be the only danger why I still think if you're Chris Ballard, you want to go to number 1. And again, leave nothing a chance. Again, this is a huge draft for him. The main goal should be leave nothing to chance, which is why we kind of talked about, I believe it was last week, if not 2 weeks ago, why the price for going to number 1 should never be too high. If you're Chris Ballard, you should pay almost any price you can because you have to control the draft and you have to control your own future. The only way to do so is by ensuring you go to number 1 and preventing all these doomsday scenarios, which are all realistic, by the way, from happening. Right? It's not like a pipe dream. We're saying, oh, if this happens and this star, and we have like one of those, what is it, a scatter board, right? Like, what's the thing that you see in a lot of police movies where they have the board, the tack board, and you have all the strings tied together, like, and you're just like trying to. Well, we're not sitting here concocting these crazy trade ideas that are almost never going to happen, only working in Madden. These are all realistic, and there's again multiple ways in which the Colts are sitting in there at pick number 4, drafting into the 3rd or 4th quarterback on their board. Don't let that happen. Entirely
realistic. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the Raiders and the Panthers because they're the 2 biggest outside that top 5 who might come in. There's no guarantee that Seattle at 5 won't move up. It's highly unlikely, but it's not absolutely written in stone. And then I think the Titans, who I believe are 11 or 12, somewhere in that range, they could get involved in this even potentially. So, especially if they're sitting there watching the Colts and Texans at 2 and 4, and they're saying, no, we're going to go up to 1 or 3, and try to at least get one of those guys a quarterback that they wanted. I just think there's too many scenarios to sit at 4. There's just too many things that could happen. And it's not out of the question that at 4, you're picking the 4th quarterback. Right. You really want Will Levis at 4th overall?
No, and I don't think Chris Ballard is going to be someone to take a quarterback just to take quarterback, even when we've talked about how you have to take one. If they don't like Will Levis, let's say if he's the last guy there, or Anthony Richardson, I don't think, even with everything we've said, I don't think Chris Ballard is going to take a guy just to take a guy, even with all the pressure on this year. So like I said, you probably either drafting Will Anderson or Jalen Carter, trading back, but either way, leaving yourself still in a position to where the most important position on the field is still a question mark going into 2023, and just another season, which you vowed to kind of stop the quarterback carousel and get off, is now we're looking at reality of just, well, it's going to continue to spin and nothing does change. Last thing I want to ask you here, George, when it comes to kind of takeaways from the combine. We've talked about Anthony Richardson a lot, and obviously he was the biggest name, the biggest flash, the guy everyone is talking about after his measurements, after his interviews, after what he did on the field on Saturday. Let me ask you this. With Richardson, at least in the media, at least according to, executives and others, rising up the board and according to Vegas odds as well, does that impact the Colts in a positive way? Because let me just, I guess, throw this theory out there. We've talked about a lot about Bryce Young and CJ Stroud being the 2 quarterbacks that we would think would be most likely to go number 1. I still think it's Bryce Young pretty strongly to go number 1. But now with Richardson rising up, are teams, do you think, like, let's say the Panthers, let's say the Seahawks, let's say the Raiders, if they kind of look at, okay, we can trade all of this capital to go to number 1 and get Bryce Young, or we could look at the Cardinals at 3, depending on where the Bears trade, maybe you're sitting there looking at the Bears at number 4, the Seahawks, maybe if they're not in love with Richardson, number 5, or the Lions at 6, we could go from 9 to 3, 9 to 4, 9 to 5, or 7 to 5, and get Richardson and pay less and get a quarterback we believe in, instead of going all the way up to number 1 and giving up what the Bears are asking for in 3 first-round picks. I think Richardson's stock, even though I don't think that really the Colts are buying much into it, just because Chris Ballard told you the workouts to him are irrelevant on Wednesday. So I don't think they took much stock from what he did. And I don't think they were too enamored by all the things he's able to do in underwear and a t-shirt. I think that actually the Richardson hype could help benefit the Colts, because I think it in almost in a way could lower the market for the Bears at number 1. Because I think teams would be more comfortable giving up a lower price and a higher ceiling guy in Richardson than giving up a bigger price to go to number 1 and get either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it could help in a number of ways. I mean, what you're just talking about, it could help. It could help if somebody moving up to one really is in love with him. I think for
That's
Colts, a
true
scenario
too.
that they would really like is like, let's just say Carolina, who basically has 6 quarterback coaches now, the way Frank Reich has set up that staff. That a place that makes a lot of sense for Anthony Richardson in that regard. You've got so many people in there to be in his ear, and then if you could get an Andy Dalton or somebody like that in as the veteran placeholder, it might not be a bad spot for him in that regard. You go up to one, and they take Richardson, and then Houston takes Bryce Young, and you sit at 4 and end up with CJ Stroud. Not an awful outcome from Chris Ballard's standpoint. Same way as if no one goes to 1 and Young goes to Houston at 2 and someone comes to 3 for Richardson, is not an awful outcome. Also, though, from the Colts standpoint, if you do buy into Richardson to the extent that some of these other people are saying Shane Steichen can turn him into a supersized version of Jalen Hurts, then you're more comfortable at 4 as well, because probably not guaranteed, but the odds of 1, 2, and 3 being quarterbacks are not great. We've just thrown out some scenarios where that can happen, but you'd feel pretty good that one of Stroud, Young, or Richardson would still be on the board when you're picking at 4. So I think in all those ways, it helps the Colts. None of it, in my mind, should make them not want to just go to 1 and take care of all this.
Right.
But I do think that it it's another variable out there that changes the math here, which is just crazy. I mean, you wouldn't think you'd still be doing that this relatively late in the process, but it's that kind of year. And we haven't even gotten to pro days yet when all of them will look like, Super Bowl MVPs, and this will go all over again. So I do think Richardson, though, the more highly thought of he is inside and outside of that building, the better it is for the Colts.
Agreed, because like I said, even if they're not interested, like I said, it's still not an excuse not to go to number 1. But I think what it does do, bare minimum, is help maybe lower the competition for number 1, which would then again lower the price and maybe save you an extra 3rd round pick or an extra 2nd round pick in the future. And again, just had that asset that you need, because again, Colts, while they need a quarterback desperately, we'll get to more of this on Thursday when we kind of do our free agency preview for this team and kind of areas that they need to address. The Colts have areas that they need to address, right? It's not like they are a quarterback away and everything else, is fine, ready to go. They have other areas they need to address, which means you want to still, while moving up to number 1, get the quarterback that, you think could transform your franchise. Also, 2, have still enough capital left over to build a team around him and build a team that can help make Bryce Young's transition or CJ Stroud's transition to the NFL from college easier by putting good talent around them. So again, if Anthony Richardson's glow up here at the combine, at the end of the day, help save the Colts a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick in a year or 2. Great. Thank you. That is all you want to hear, which again, could really go benefit them as well. So it's craziness, George. I feel like, I had a good handle on it. My head is now, just this last 45 minutes we've been talking, my head is spinning. The math, the combos, the all the different possibilities that could happen here in just the span of 4 picks. It's not like we're talking about the Colts here at number 10 or 12 and could they move up. We're talking about just 3 teams ahead of them and all the different outcomes here. It's exponential in terms of who they could end up with, where they could be drafting. It's going to be a dizzying, busy next 2 months here, but the combine really does get things going here. And at least I think start to give a little bit of clarity. Again, not many, really no answers, I would say, but maybe some direction, a little bit of clarity of where the Colts are thinking, and you're starting to at least get a little bit of an indication of who's interested in whom and the market and how it's starting to shape out.
It's going to be insane. I mean, just thinking about the first pick alone, all the permutations right now, and how it changes everything that comes after that. Who gets that pick? What do they pay? Who do they take? And then everything from that point forward changes. Again, I keep saying it, but it's just such a fascinating year. And for me, it's so much fun because the Colts are right there, right in the middle of all of it.
This is totally random, very random. It has to do with the combine. I want to give one shout out here really fast to kind of wrap up the combine talk. Andrew Voorhees, offensive lineman for USC. I've never seen anything like this, George. He is performing on the field workouts, a very highly touted lineman, tears his ACL, devastating injury. The next day comes back with on crutches with a brace on his knee, and then pounds out 38 reps on the bench press, which is the highest total of any player at the combine. I told you, we talked about this last week. There's nothing physically that could happen at the combine because I don't care, because it just means almost all irrelevant at this point. I take that back. That is by far the only thing I'll be impressed on. That is insane. Torn ACL, next day, 38 reps of 225, the highest total. That's a dog. That is unreal.
And I'll tell you, there's part of Chris Ballard wants to trade up to number one for him now. I can tell you that. Just that toughness, that ability to overcome adversity. Yeah, there's no doubt.
You said it last week, right? That Ballard fell in love with Quentin Nelson on the field at the scouting combine right there. And that kind of convinced him to take Quentin Nelson, as we know, eventually at pick number 6 back in 2018. Can you imagine the Colts take their number 4? Forget quarterback, Andrew Voorhees. Chris, what convinced you? Well, I saw him tear his ACL, next day pound out 38 reps. That's the toughness we need on this team. That is incredible.
He's a blue player on their board now. That much you can pretty much guarantee. He's a Colt. No, I mean that's incredible to do that. To even come back the next day, but then to do 38 reps. I guarantee you, there's in all seriousness, there's a lot of teams who the opinion of Andrew Voorhees has skyrocketed. And I know he's got to get through the injury, and that's going to hurt his draft stock overall. But I guarantee you there's a couple teams probably as early as second round now saying, maybe it's worth it, because if he's going to fight like that at the combine, what's he going to do for me on the field?
The irony of a prospect tearing his ACL, probably going to be out the entire year, and maybe his draft stock goes up. You can't make it up. You truly cannot make up, George, what happens at the scouting combine. That is for sure. So we have put in the rearview mirror now all the craziness from the combine. And just like that, right on the corner now with the Super Bowl pushback, it's a very condensed offseason. Free agency is right around the corner. Monday starts the legal tampering period. Next Wednesday, March 15th, we'll start the official league year, which means free agents can come and go, or I should say start to get signed. So we'll talk a lot about George on Thursday's podcast. Make sure you check us out here, whether it's the Blue Horseshoe Pod on YouTube or wherever you do get your podcasts. Again, if you're looking for us, wherever you do get your podcasts, we're the Blue Horseshoe logo with the bright blue logo. Can't miss it. We had our same name from previously where we were at Odyssey, but now, although that feed has not been deleted, it could be a little confusing, but make sure if you check us out, the Blue Horseshoe Pod with the blue logo, that is where all our brand new shows will be going moving forward. So if you are already subscribed, or if you're looking for us, that's where to go. It's going to be, I think, a very interesting free agency period, George. We'll talk about the Colts' needs. We'll talk about, what free agents they should be targeting. And also, too, it is, as we record this on Tuesday, it is tag deadline day. Some players will not be tagged to become free agents. A lot of quarterbacks questions as well. A lot of quarterback questions, I should say, about who could be available, who could be tagged, and how, that could impact directly the Colts and some of their targets, or even, teams around them in the draft as well. So it's going to be a very busy next few weeks here for sure. Free agency. We'll see how the active the Colts are. But again, the cycle keeps on going, George. And it's going to be right from the scouting combine. Now let's start talking about free agents. And I think it's going to be, I'll go on a limb right away. I think this will be a different free agent period, or possibly a different free agent period than we see in recent years.
We'll see. I mean, they don't have a lot of money, and I think that's going to be interesting to see how they handle that. But there's no doubt. I mean, there's a different mindset. You got a new coach. That always makes you want to bring in more guys. It just naturally. I mean, you look around the league, new head coaches are going to bring in more players. It's just the way things go. They want guys who have run their system before, or who do a certain thing the way they want it done. And I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But, on Thursday, we should have a really good conversation, because I know there's a couple guys already in my mind that I think they're going to be interested in, or should be, that we can talk about.
I will give you a 48-hour tease to look forward to Thursday's pod. I think free agency is definitely something to watch. I think there's one aspect that could lend and give you an idea of how the Colts are approaching the draft. So that's the tease. 2 days. Hopefully you can wait long enough here. And we'll dive into that, and obviously a lot more, needs, like I said, players that they should or could be interested in as well. So a very big loaded show on Thursday. We appreciate you listening to this edition, the Combine Wrap-Up show of the Blue Horseshoe Pod right here on Tuesday. Have a great rest of your week. Again, make sure you download the Blue Horseshoe Pod wherever you get your pods, and check us out on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod right there. And also, whether it's scouting combine-wise, free agent-wise, draft-wise, Ask us any question you want. Very simple. Shoot us an email, bluehorseshoepod@gmail.com. We'll get your questions. We'll answer them right here on the podcast as well. Any question at any time you feel you want to ask us and get answered, bluehorseshoepod@gmail.com. Shoot us an email and we will answer your questions on the pod as well. So have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you on Thursday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.